Hello and welcome back to Darts News Weekly. Back again once again with Samuel Gill. Weekend of the World Cup of Darts. I mean, we're right in the middle of a busy month in the calendar now with the Grand Slam Players Championships and of course the Winter Series this week kicking off at 2 p.m. each day, which I am absolutely delighted about. But we've seen the World Cup of Darts. It's a tournament that I really enjoy every year. Wales were the favourites from the start, as you'd expect, with the best player in the world at the moment, Gerwyn Price, the form top 16 player in the shape of Johnny Clayton. They were the favourites that around, I believe, 9-4 on to start the tournament, and they've gone and won it relatively convincingly. There was no real scare where it looked like they were going to drop the ball, but a 3-0 win against England in the final for Price and Clayton, and Wales the deserved winners, Sam.
Yeah, 100%. I think, to be fair, and even so, the pressure was on them going into this weekend because, of course, with them being the favourites, it was up to them to deliver. Of course, England, time and time again, have been the favourites, and barring when Phil Taylor was in the lineup and Adrian Lewis, they've never really built on that since. Barring, of course, getting to the final this year. But yeah, it was thoroughly deserved from them. I think Clayton, even as much as people will let him out Price, Clayton for me was the best out of the duo this weekend. He was absolutely superb, and he carried on his form from last weekend. And you ended up even putting on Twitter about Clayton for the Premier League. And I'm not sure I believe in that, Josh. But yeah, a thoroughly good weekend of darts ahead of about, I believe, 23 days this month of darts. So strap in. It's going to be a long ride.
Well, we might as well get straight into that point then. I mean, I did put on Twitter last night about the possibility, not about me particularly wanting Johnny Clayton in the Premier League, but the possibility that and the questions that his performance sort of brings up. We've seen one ranked TV winner not make the Premier League in Paul Nicholson at the Players Championships 2010. And then Ko Stumpy, of course, won the World Cup alongside Raymond van Barneveld in the same year. Didn't make the Premier League, although I believe it was just 8 players in the Premier League at that point. Of course, we have 10 now, assuming there's no contenders in the 2021 Premier League. He's a TV winner now, Johnny Clayton. He's had a semi-final at the European Championships, and he's had a good run at the UK Open as well. There are signs to suggest that he may be more deserving than some of the names that may be dropping out. Cross and Gurney are the names I will mention that probably need something to hang on to those to that Premier League spot. But from what we've seen from Clayton, he's inside the top 16 now, as we know. There's a couple more semi-finals. You've got to think that he's in with a shout, considering the sort of two places up for grabs at the moment in the Premier League.
I'd say he's definitely got a shot, but for me, he's not Premier League. Like, he's not. A term that gets used all the time is box office with the Premier League, and for me, he's not box office. No offense to him or anything, but he doesn't. For me, he doesn't have the personality for the Premier League. I'm not saying certain other players, do that. It's a bit of a conundrum this year, to be honest with you, because he might end up getting in because barring about 6 or 7 players who have their spot on merit and will likely always get in. If, like you say, they end up quashing the contenders and say, we're going to go back to 10, we're going to have 10 of the world's best, he might end up getting in. But of course, there's other players even outside the top 16 that are being mooted for the Premier League, like Devin Peterson and Dirk van Dijvenbode have been spoken about, and even inside the top 16, the likes of Joe Cullen have been spoken about. And do they warrant a place over Johnny Clayton? Like you say, he's now a TV winner. It's a pairs tournament, so he didn't win it individually, so you kind of have the argument with that. When people say about the only player to miss out on the Premier League before, they only say Paul Nicholson a lot of the time. They don't really say Ko Stumpy. But yeah, no, I think the point is massively valid. I think he will be in the reckoning for the Premier League, but it all comes down to whether or not Barry and Sky and the team that decide it. I think think he's box office enough to give him his Premier League debut, and whether or not he has the temperament to play as well as he's been playing at the minute over the how many weeks you play in the Premier League. For me,
I agree with the point that you say. Obviously, it's a pairs tournament. It's not an individual tournament like Nicholson winning in 2010. And in terms of box office and what a viewer's going to see, I mean, we don't know if there's going to be a crowd in the 2021 Premier League yet, but you have to think that does probably affect, in some way at least, who Sky and the PDC are going to pick. Remember, it is essentially wild cards, with Sky and PDC picking 6 of the 10 players outside the top 4 in the world who automatically get in. There's so many names you could mention, but having a TV win does count for something, and he's definitely catapulted his name into the conversation, if not into the Premier League already. But there's so much riding on these last 3 events in terms of if we get an outside winner at the Grand Slam. James Wade has been mentioned a couple of times, and if he wins a TV event, he'll be a shoo-in, I'm sure. And the World Championship has seen so many performances over the years. Kirk Shepherd, Jamie Lewis getting to a semi-final, to name a couple. If we see an outsider semi-finalist, should we say, or even one of those names that we've mentioned, a Peterson or even a D'Souza or someone like that, gets to a semi-final or a final, then they've got to be in the conversation as well. But the Premier League this year is very, very hard to decide. There's names that you'd expect to be up there, not in form. There's names coming from outside the top 64 that have really made a name for himself in the behind closed doors environment. So, I mean, the Premier League is a conversation that we should be leaving to another month or so down the line, but we always get wrapped up in the hype of it, and we'll be looking forward to when that 10 name list comes out.
I've got another point to add with the Premier League. So it depends when it is. They could feasibly, with crowds not being back, put it till the middle of next year again, and have a bit like what they've had this year, like what they've been saying with the autumn series, summer series, winter series, about having them again next year. They could have the Premier League in the middle of next year, just as kind of a safety measure, really, because they don't really want to be selling tickets and shooting themselves in the foot if we can't have crowds. And then you've got to think about it. You've got those 3 events, and you've got the Masters, the first lot of Pro Tours. Even if you do it up to like the World Match Play in July, and have that as almost the cut-off point, you could have another player come through the field, and you could even say that if Dimitri van den Berg tails off in that case, that he isn't deserving of his spot. So there's kind of there is kind of a big conversation. For me, I'd put World Series potentially at the start of the year. So you have January, February, March. The only tournaments you have are your Masters in January if that happens. But again, that's a small TV event, so that can happen, and you can just have the top 16 in the world. That gives them a chance to try putting themselves up in the rank in the reckoning. And then you have, of course, the Pro Tours. You have a big bulk of Pro Tours, get them all in that time. Top 16 or whoever gets picked for the World Series. I'd even throw some wildcards into the World Series, some players who you think might be in the reckoning for the Premier League, like your Devon Petersons, like your Joe Collins, like your Jose de Souza's, like your Diamond Boders, who have performed well this year and I think deserve a shot at something for how well they've been performing, and see how they do in these countries where there are a lot of fans back in, like Australia, America, China, if they go back there, etc. And just have that kind of 3-month block as kind of a bit of a proving ground for the Premier League, and then pick your lineup in the middle of the year when we potentially have fans back in time for the World Match Play, hopefully, I'd say.
There are a few other names to talk about from the World Cup of Darts. I'm going to kick the conversation off by saying what a run for Canada, and in many ways I think they were a little unlucky against Belgium in the quarterfinals. Matt Campbell was proved to be a real find this weekend. We saw him at the World Championships in 2020. looked solid enough, but he lost out to, I believe it was Mark McGeaney on that occasion. And at the weekend, he was absolutely fantastic. 160 checkout, 180s, 177s, whatever you want. Matt Campbell provided at the weekend. And alongside Jeff Smith, they look to be a very, very solid duo, and just came up short in the doubles discipline against a fired up Kim Huybrechts and Dimitri Vandenberg. So Canada, for me, a name to look out for. You impressed, Sam?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's almost a progression now. I think the USA have to go this way now, in terms of you've got a solid team in Canada who are able to get to the latter stages of these tour of the World Cup, and of course USA ended up going out first round, albeit to an Austrian team who are very good at times over their weekend. So yeah, it's kind of up to the USA now, because of course they're on the same tour on the CDC that Matt Campbell's on, Chuck Pulio and Danny Labby Jr. For me, it's kind of all about getting that team up to standard now. But for me, I wouldn't say I saw Matt Campbell coming. Of course, we saw him at the World Championships, but he's been throwing in brilliant averages on the CDC tour. He's been a standout for the past few years, and it's been one of those players that time and time again has performed. But again, it's all about consistency, and I've said this before, and that's Week 2, that he's players like that just need experience, because he can chuck in at a 105 average, a bit like Martijn Kleermaker. He can throw in a 105 average and average 70. He didn't really show issues with his temperament over the weekend, and he even said he's going to Q school in January. So yeah, another good player, another good find, and hopefully he'll be able to replicate that at the World Championship. I'm sure before this weekend, he would have been one of the players that the seeds wouldn't have wanted to draw, but even more so now, he'll be towards the top of that list. And yeah, hopefully, if he's able to stay in the UK before the World Championships, which I think a number of players are, and not going home now, and get some practice in, potentially with Jeff Smith, if he's staying over, of course, for the Winter Series and the Players' Champs finals. I think he can make a real good run of it in the Worlds. It was good to see, of course, Portugal make their debut, losing to Austria in the second round. But of course, it's always, I don't think Jose played that well, to be honest with you. For me, it's a bit different though, because it's the World Cup discipline, and of course it's probably a point that you'll probably go on to in terms of having more pairs games that a lot of people are kind of calling for over the weekend, and were quite frustrated that it was just all singles on those like first 2 days. We didn't really get any pairs deciders. I was impressed with New Zealand as well, even though of course they lost to Canada. I think it kind of came down to Hopai Puha, who is another one who's going to be stayed in the UK up until the World Championships. He couldn't miss a double in that first game. But then it kind of just, it fell, ironically, which is how darts can be sometimes, it kind of fell apart for him on the doubles in his singles game. I'd throw into that as well, the likes of course, England, who got to the final. It's not really a massive shock, but considering where both of them were form-wise recently, and they're one of those teams, despite being top seeds, they didn't really have the favourites tag on them, and they went about their business, and they just came across an absolutely superb Wales team in the final. And Michael Smith even said afterwards that in the end the better team won. So it kind of shows, but hopefully that'll give him some good form going forward. Cross played all right the weekend, and he showed that he does still have some of that form in his locker. And of course, Germany as well. For me, you put them alongside Canada as a pairing. Of course, Germany are more well established in the World Cup, but as a pairing that can really do damage in the future years. You've got Max Hopp and Gabriel Clemens, who, of course, it'll be Clemens and Hopp next year, because Clemens will be Germany's #1. But Hopp is getting back towards his towards some of his best form, and it's really good to see. Of course, in a formidable player like Clemens, you've got a team that, if both of them can sustain it and they don't have any problems, it's going to be great. And finally, I'm not going to talk about Latvia, actually. I'm going to talk about Hong Kong. Kai Fan Lung, for me, played really well in that pairs game, but something I spoke to you about over the weekend was Royden Lamb, and how sad it was to see him. He looks like he's going through a bit of dartitis, and for a player as good as him, it's such a shame to see. And it was quite sad. It wasn't as evident. A lot of the time, it's almost just people like us who we watch a lot of darts, looking at his throw and seeing that he's got problems with it. Like, he didn't have issues with his release, unlike Scott McKenzie, who used to represent Hong Kong, where it kind of ruined his career at the end. And he kind of played on and actually played all right towards the end, but just kind of admitted that, you know, he couldn't play as well as he could anymore. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not Royden Lamb can get over this and get back towards his best. But ultimately, that game was a tale of Kai Fan Lung carrying the team. He couldn't carry the team. He played all right, but you add in there Razma and Mustafayez, if I'm pronouncing that right, so I don't pronounce it on Sky. A team like that who played really well and lived up to the occasion, despite for the latter he had no sleep coming from the UK, ironically from St Helens, which is quite funny. He had no sleep coming over, and he even said in his post-match interview that he was literally had to have his COVID test, and then he was straight into action. Same with Razma, but they kind of lived up to the occasion. And I was kind of surprised in a way to see Latvia in it. So I even said to you, and it was kind of a bit of a shame for me that Croatia weren't involved over the weekend. Of course, you know I'm a big fan of Boris Krčmar, Pero Ljubic as well, two established players. Of course, Madas Razma is a tour card holder, but his partner, despite playing quite well, barring his singles game against Kim Huybrechts, he kind of came out of nowhere and has only played a few Nordic and Baltic events. So unless Krčmar and Ljubic turned it down, which I can kind of understand, you know, sitting on a standby list, sitting by the phone and waiting when they could be coming, especially in Krčmar's case, coming over for the Winter Series next week. He's not pulled out, so I'm guessing he's coming over. But yeah, no, it was interesting to see, of course, Portugal and Latvia be in. But yeah, and another point before I let you speak, after me speaking for about 10 minutes, is that for certain teams, you have to kind of look at it for next year. And I've said this for a while, not only the pairs format, but the countries that are in it. Some perform really well. Greece, for me, I ended up writing them off before the weekend and said that, in a way, they shouldn't be in the tournament because you've only really got John Michael who can play a decent enough standard, and they haven't, barring this weekend, they haven't won a game in about 5 years. And you have certain other countries that, you know, were kind of sitting ducks at times. Gibraltar were one of them for me. You had two 18-year-olds who played a superb level on that stage against Lithuania. That I kind of said at the start of the weekend, it's just ultimately dice and parity, and then you've got another partner coming in. So you could have the likes of Croatia and Portugal next year. It's something I think needs to get looked at alongside the pairs format. You need to have stronger countries in the tournament at times, especially if the tour card holders already. But yeah, no, a great weekend overall. And I'll let you speak now, Josh, because I've spoken for long enough.
Yeah, there's a couple of points I'm going to touch on there. We'll start with Royden Lamb. I think people forget that he's a former tour card holder. Although he didn't make too many events while he did have his tour card. He came through Q School at one point, and he was a quality player. Saw him in the World Championships, seen him in the World Cup produce some shocks over the years. And if you do go back and look at his throw from even 18 months ago, it's radically different to what it was at the weekend. And whether that is dartitis or not, he's definitely having some problems there. And whether he's not thrown enough lately, or whether he is struggling with dartitis, it's something that you hope is sorted for Royden Lamb, because he is a top class player when he gets the chance. And talking about countries that should be in or out, I mean, we saw some countries get wins in the first round that maybe we didn't expect. Greece, as you say, they were a name that I looked at and thought, well, they're not the strongest on there. Is maybe their time up after this tournament, and we'll get to see a new nation. But after winning and playing so well in that first round, you think you'll see them back again. Latvia and another side, Rasmus looked good, and Mustafayev's, if he can start playing a little bit on the Baltic, Nordic and Baltic tour, and maybe even see him on the Challenge Tour or something, then he's a player that could really improve. I mean, I looked at his results in the Nordic and Baltic tour from earlier in the year, and they weren't exactly the greatest results. But you know, if he can produce darts like that, darts like he did over at the weekend, then I don't think there's any reason why he can't start competing on something like the Challenge Tour. And it'd be nice to see another name added into the mix. You mentioned Germany. I mean, we mentioned at the weekend they're probably the most closely matched sides of the World Cup. Gabriel Clemens and Max Hopp, of course. I think there'll be so many names in the Germany lineup that are sort of in and out, looking to squeeze into that top two in the World Cup team. Nico Kurz probably not far away if he can get on the tour and start playing what we've seen him play at the World Championships. Martin Schindler, of course, hoping to get back in that side, but needs to improve his performances. Out of all the sides, probably discounting England and maybe the Netherlands, Germany is a very competitive nation for those two World Cup spots. And over the years, maybe not next year, but probably the year after, I expect to see Nico Kurz replace either Hopp or Clemens. I don't know who it's going to be yet, with their form probably going in opposite directions at the moment, but it only takes one run, and both players have got that in them.
Yeah, definitely. I disagree in terms of Kurtz coming into the team. I believe Clemens will at least sustain it for the next few years. I'd say he's one for the future in terms of him coming in, but for now, I wouldn't say he's kind of a real threat for them. He has to get his PDC tour card first, kind of put himself in the reckoning. But again, you know, it's with him, it's if not when. It depends as well on what career path he wants to go down, because it seems like for him, he's ultimately darts isn't the only thing that's kind of part of his life, and at times he's kind of picked the wrong events for me. And as like with the European tour, for example, when he decided to play the first few, and then the final one where he had the chance of qualifying for the Euros, he decided not to turn up for the qualifier. So at times his temperament's a bit like, you know, for me, another thought I just had when I went out the room for a moment was about Spain. For me, of course, they ended up reaching the second round, and but for me, Alcinas was a bit of a strange one to put alongside Royden Lamb. And I've said this time and time again in terms of Spain. In terms of Nogueira being the only player qualified for the World Championships at the moment, it's a country in crisis for me in terms of darts. You had three players when Nogueira got his tour card that were on the PDC tour, and you could only have one at the end of the year in Nogueira. You've had, of course, Jose Justicia before play for Spain, but ultimately it looks like Nogueira is the only player who's playing at a decent enough standard at the moment. Alcinas is not playing like he did against Peter Wright when he dumped him at the World Championships. And it's a question that kind of needs to be asked about Spain. Of course, they'll be in the World Cup going forward because they're a big nation. But in terms of their individual players, how they're going to bounce back from this, because of course we haven't really seen Reyes this year at all, and I'm not sure he's even in the Winter Series. And I'm guessing he potentially, even if he is, he might have decided to withdraw from the World Cup to get over here and save his tour card, as opposed to playing in Austria a week and having a mad dash over to the UK to play. And until we see the lineups of the Grand Slam qualifier later today, we don't know. There hasn't actually been an entry list released. But for me, it's ultimately a country that going forward, we might only have one main player, and his name's Jesus Nogueira.
Of course, we've got the Winter Series coming up. Still a couple of places up for grabs at the Grand Slam of Darts starting a week from today in Coventry, of course, like in Wolverhampton. Aldersley Leisure Village, as you call it, because you are sure that that's not in Wolverhampton. But there's plenty of places available, and it's a tournament that we all look forward to. I mean, the group stage is definitely one where shocks can be produced. But you looking forward to the Grand Slam?
And yeah, of course, we have the Grand Slam qualifier, or as I call it, the best event of the year, when we end up getting 8 qualifiers today from 6 p.m. tonight, qualifying for the event. Of course, 2 p.m. start every day as well. So for those who work covering these events, it's going to be a very long day compared to your 12 o'clock starts. And of course, you're going to get certain players who are going to qualify for the event who only really show it in these qualifiers. You're going to get the same with the Worlds. And for me, ultimately, in a way, you have to kind of look at changing the criteria, in my opinion, going forward, because you're going to, for me, I'd rather see the best in the development tour. So the likes of Ryan Meekling, Kean Barry, qualifying, the likes of David Evans and Richie Edhouse in the Challenge Tour. I was going to say development tour then, but yeah, the Challenge Tour. They will both be playing this weekend, ironically, and I believe they can even enter into this qualifier themselves as standby players and get into the Grand Slam. So in my opinion, they should get there by right, instead of players who turn up for one weekend and don't really show any form. No offense to them, and I'm not going to name names, but players who just show up for the one weekend of the year in terms of form-wise, play themselves into the Grand Slam in terms of a ranking event, and it can save a tour card for a few players, go and give them a World Championship spot even, which I'm going to talk about, because of course we've got the Players Championship finals and the cut-off for the Pro Tour Order of Merit as well for the World Championships. And you've got Jesus Nogueira, who we saw this past weekend. He's currently in the final spot, and like I say, he's the only Spaniard who's actually going to be in the World Championships at the moment. You've got Benito van der Pas only just in, who will be looking to save his tour card, even though he's looking nigh on impossible in terms of mathematically at the moment. Ron Muhlenkamp's just outside of the spots. You've got Karel Sedlacek, Darren Webster even. Scott Mitchell from the Challenge Tour, he's outside the spots and will be playing this weekend. My favourite player, Boris Kretschmar, is outside the spots and could make a World Championship debut, and more likely will because of his form on the floor. If he can get to a few latter stages like he did in the autumn series, again, he will definitely get into the World Championships, because he's only about £100, like £500 off getting into the World Championships at the moment. You've got the likes of Jelle Klassen at the moment, won't qualify for the World Championships, and many other names. You've got further down likes of Robert Thornton, who played at the weekend, who has his tour card riding on whether or not he qualifies for the World Championships. I believe he's in a good spot at the moment to qualify for the Players Championship finals, which might hold the key for him in terms of getting to the World Championships. But a good 5 days in Coventry will alleviate that. Of course, he has match practice that quite a lot of players will not have since not playing for quite some time, barring the PDC Home Tour, which is not the same thing really. A lot of players haven't played since that autumn series and have not qualified for European tours. So we will likely see the standard increase over the first few days in Coventry, past the Grand Slam qualifier. But ultimately, a few players being quite rusty, we might see a few early exits. I think the big names will be on song. It'll be interesting to see how Gary Anderson performs, especially considering he's not played. God, how long's it been since Gary Anderson's not played? In a number of months. He decided he gets played in the World Series of Darts finals. He played in the Premier League playoffs. But barring that, we haven't actually seen him for a number of months, and has decided to almost curtail his season because of travel restrictions. A bit like Peter Wright. Peter, of course, played really well recently and kind of came from nowhere to win the European Championships. For me, Ian White needs a good week as well. He even said himself that he needs to start performing in the major tournaments, because the smaller pro tours aren't going to cut it anymore in terms of his ranking. There's not enough of them, and he hasn't. I don't know if he's won a Players' Championship this year, Ian White, off the top of my head. But he seems to win one every year, so it might be the opportunity for Ian White to give himself another ranking title, which, considering his form on the TV at times, is it shows how good of a player he is, and it's a shame he can't replicate that. But yeah, you're going to be looking as well at the usual suspects getting to the last stages for me every day. Danny Noppert's one of them, Gabriel Clemens, Jermaine Watamina, players like that who thrive on the floor and are brilliant. But I keep going back to him, Boris Kretschmar again. For me, after his form in the autumn series, he keeps getting better and better, and it wouldn't even surprise me to see him win a title this week. Martijn Kleermaker, it wouldn't surprise me to see him win a title. Dirk even though his form on the floor is kind of a bit in the middle. He's good. He's better than some players who can't bring it up to the stage or bring it down from the stage. But he'll be looking to continue his form. Jeff Smith even, if he decides to come over, he's had a weekend of playing, of course, in the World Cup, and started the year like an absolute train. And it's a shame to see him not qualify for the World Grand Prix because he was in an absolute shame position, but lost first round, I believe, every single day in the autumn series, barring one. And yeah, ultimately, it's just going to be interesting to see. It's going to be our last Pro Tour action of the year, our last Pro Tour / European Tour kind of action. You're not your main events, so not your majors or your TVs, and we won't get another set until the start of next year. So it's gonna be a good week, and basically before all the madness begins over the next few weeks before the World Championships.
Yeah, certainly a mad few weeks, and looking forward to seeing who gets through those Grand Slam qualifiers. Certainly expect to see a couple of names that we don't see so often in those World Championships and in the TV events. And it'd be interesting to see who we see at the Grand Slam. It's always a tournament that I look forward to, and some excellent darts in prospect over the next few weeks. Thank you very much for watching. Well, mainly Samuel Gill, not so much me this week, but thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.